Hello, and welcome to the recorded version of the coffee talk that was given last week, the week of August 22nd. We had a couple sessions where parents could come in and kind of get some information about college admissions in general, but more specifically, college applications and kind of the tasks that are right in front of our seniors right now. So the purpose of this presentation is, like I said, to cover all the pertinent information that students need right now as they're going into September here. We kind of cover some groundwork, kind of the framework for college admissions, talk about everyone's role in the process as far as students, parents, and me as the advisor. And then we kind of get into the fine details of, what are the most pressing things that students need to be focused on at this very moment. So wanted to record this so people that were not able to attend either session can still get that information readily. So we're going to start off here on the Providence homepage. We are in the process of updating our website in different areas, and that is the same for counseling. So if you go to academics and go to counseling center, I wanted to direct your attention to the applying for college tab over here. And if you scroll down, you're going to find this thing called College Planning Workbook. So I've put together kind of a comprehensive guide for anyone starting this college search process. So there's 27 pages. It's quite dense, but if you have any questions and you're not really sure where to start at, this could be a great resource to you as well. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to direct to your attention. If we go back, one thing that will be updated very soon, hopefully sometime this week, and this is being recorded, by the way, on August 29th. So hopefully sometime this week, we will have a link here for college scholarships. So all the local scholarships, the community foundation, things like that, we have a spreadsheet that will be constantly updated. And so we'll give you that link so you can see all the updates as they take place. So that will be a great resource to you as well. So look for that here soon. Another resource I wanted to direct you to, you don't have access to this, but your student does. All the seniors are in this class of 2023 that I've created on Google Classroom. So within here, I post different announcements to all the seniors, important information about college admissions, scholarships. You can see last week I put a post, a reminder about the college fair. So that's an important date to remember, is September 26th over at New Albany High School. There'll be a large college fair. So wanted to make sure all of our students and parents knew that they were invited to that. Highly encourage it. It can be really helpful to get to know the admissions counselors, all the reps that will be there standing behind their tables in the gym. So that's really important. As far as financial aid, I just mentioned scholarships. Another important date I'd have you mark on your calendar, and you'll be getting an email about this, but September 15th at 6 p.m. here at Providence in the auditorium, I will be joined by Lauren Lewis, who is a financial aid counselor at Bellarmine. So she's going to kind of give an overview of financial aid and really get everyone prepared for October 1st, which is when the FAFSA opens, which is another critical part of this process. So I'll definitely mention that later as well. But like I said, I just post, different announcements here to seniors. You can see here, I posted about the Community Foundation of Southern Indiana, extending the deadline for that. And then I'll, just include random things that I find on the internet that I think could be helpful. So when I went around to all the students' classrooms a couple of weeks ago and shared pretty much all the same information, we talked a lot about essays, and essays can be one of those, hurdles for students that really causes a lot of stress and anxiety. So I include a link to Johns Hopkins where they actually show you essays of students who were admitted to Johns Hopkins. Obviously a pretty selective school, so it's kind of nice, if a student doesn't really know what an essay should look like, they can always come here and read some actual essays from other students. Obviously, we don't want them to copy and paste, but just, it could be helpful to give a student some direction. Okay, and I know students can add you as a parent here on any of their Google Classroom pages. Your student probably has a classroom page for just about every course they're taking here at Providence. But I know they can add you. I just don't know for certain what your access looks like and what it looks like on your end. You might want to ask your student about that. Okay, so those were just a couple things I wanted to direct you to. I'm now going to move into kind of the presentation aspect. And as I mentioned, this is the same presentation that I showed last week. And it's very similar to the information that was given to your student back, I think, the first week of school, actually. First or second week of school, I was in the senior theology classrooms going over all this information. And I will be returning this week as well. So Wednesday and Thursday of this week before Labor Day weekend, I will be returning to those senior classrooms to give them ample time, dedicated time during school to work on applications, essays, all that kind of stuff, scholarships. Because I know students are busy. And so if we can give them that dedicated time during the course of the day, I think that'll be really helpful. So I look forward to doing that later this week. But let's go ahead and get into the information. I mentioned I like to kind of start with guiding principles. I think it's really important that we kind of lay the groundwork here. And one thing I really stress to students all the time and to parents is that we really need students to take the lead in this process, because at the end of the day, they're going to be on their own next year. And so the more responsibilities we can start kind of shifting towards them this year, not just in college admissions, but in life in general, I think that's a good positive thing. We want them to become more independent. They might be used to having you take the lead and kind of speak for them. But this process is really all about them. So we're there to support them in every way. And I know it can be hard to, hand over those responsibilities to students because we don't want them to make mistakes or to fail. But we really got to get them used to taking the lead in this process and in life in general. And the next 2 points, I just want to reiterate how important this decision is. And, I don't say that to be patronizing. Obviously, everyone is going to be, giving this careful thought and consideration. But sometimes we kind of lose sight of what the purpose of college is. And when making these decisions, it's really about finding the best fit for students. What's going to be the best situation for the student for the next 4 years, as far as academics, the social aspects of it, the financial impact. Obviously, parents care about that quite a bit. Maybe the student is involved in athletics, so that's going to be a big part of the decision. So we have to weigh all those options and think about, after the student leaves college, at the end of the day, we want college or students to grow, learn, all those great things in college. But at the end of the day, we also want them to find meaningful careers after they leave college. So sometimes I know it's difficult, but sometimes we have to kind of think about the far off future. I also like to remind students that actually in today's world, it's still very much a privilege for people to attend college and to get a 4-year degree. Here in the United States, for example, if we look at adults age 25 and older, only 35% of those people actually have a 4-year degree. So with that being said, it's always good to remind ourselves of all the blessings and opportunities that we have that maybe others don't. And lastly, I want students to really keep their blinders on. I always give kind of the visual of a horse-drawn carriage. Okay, the horses may have those blinders on each of their eyes. And, the purpose is to keep them focused and keep them moving forward. But probably more importantly, to keep them from getting distracted or spooked by all the noises and things happening around them. And, students today have a lot of noises and distractions, right? And that can create a ton of anxiety, which is crippling for some of our students. So it's really easy in this process for students and us as adults and parents to look around and see that other students might be applying to 10 different schools, or maybe this student just got accepted and maybe, you haven't received one yet. It's really easy to get caught up in that and kind of get freaked out. But at the end of the day, every student is different. Every student has different goals and aspirations for their future. And every student's looking for something a little bit different in a college. So there's no reason why two students would ever have the exact same path. Chances are I'm not going to be able to find two seniors who are applying to the same exact schools and are looking to major in the same exact thing. It's just impossible because every student is unique. God has created a unique path for all of us. So he has a plan for us, and it's really easy for us to look around and think that we need to be on the same course as someone right next to us when really, everyone is going to be on a completely different path. So it's important to do that. And like I said, with parents, we kind of do that too. We might hear about a parent in the car line talking about how they're doing these types of visits with their kid, or we hired a private college planner for our student, and then it may make you feel like you're doing something wrong or you're not doing enough, which is never a healthy mindset to be in. So definitely, I want students and parents alike to try to keep your blinders on. So we want to talk about everyone's individual role in the process because we all play very specific roles. But like I said, for students, we want them to be a very active participant. We want them to take the lead. We also want students to stay organized. The most difficult and confusing part of college admissions is that every school is slightly different in how they do things. They have different deadlines, for example. And so students need to really make sure that they're beating deadlines, not just meeting them. We don't want to be doing things at the 11th hour because, nothing good comes of that. So if we can have students kind of stay ahead of the curve and to be beating the deadlines in a big way, that's going to make everyone's life a little bit easier. Students will be the ones requesting transcripts and letters of recommendation. Students may be submitting test scores, or some students may be going test optional, which we'll talk about. Students will be receiving and answering phone calls, emails, all that good stuff. And like I said, we want students to take the lead role. I myself used to be an admissions counselor, and I would make numerous phone calls every day. And I can tell you firsthand, colleges want to get to know your students. So it's great, to have that contact with them as a parent. There's certain information that really is for you rather than the student. But typically, a college really wants to get to know your student and build that relationship because they want to know at the end of the day, is your student going to be a good fit for their campus? So it's really important for students to really be the ones out in front communicating with colleges. Students will also at various times be meeting with college reps, going on campus to do different events. They might be doing competitive interviews or auditions, as we progress throughout the year. A few other things students will be doing, demonstrating interest. So if your student is interested in a college, they really need to show it. And to that end, colleges actually do track some of this stuff. So colleges will track, has the student visited campus? Has a student met a college rep at maybe their high school when they visited, or maybe at a college fair? Has a student been opening emails from that college? I can remember working at admissions, and I could track every single email that was sent out to a student and see how many of those were they opening, and even so far as how many times were they opening that email, which is kind of creepy, but some schools really do put a lot of stock in the demonstrated interest index. So if you think about it, you might have two students that are very similar in academic profile, but if you have one student who has shown a lot more interest, chances are the college is going to move ahead with that applicant. So just something to think about. Not every college uses that as part of the admissions process. But I think just in general, if you're interested in a school, you should be showing that interest, right? Students also, we ask that they keep us updated. So what that looks like is when a student is admitted, gets an acceptance letter, we want to congratulate them and celebrate with them. But we also like to keep track of all of that, including merit scholarship awards. So students may be receiving that at the same time they get their acceptance letter. And we like to kind of keep track of that. And so we can have a tally at the end of the school year with all the total merit scholarship awarded to our seniors. So please keep us updated with that. Parents, you might have copies of things to send over to us. Obviously, we want the students to be the people doing that, but obviously we know sometimes that doesn't always take place. So any help you can have in that process of getting us that information, we would greatly appreciate it. And of course, it's always good to be patient with this. I kind of remind students, some are doing applications right now and getting those completed. I think we just had our first acceptance letter come in last week, which I don't say that to freak anyone out. That was a very early college acceptance, but it was the first one that I've seen come through this year. But at the end of the day, May 1st, May 1st, 2023 is the national decision deadline. So students have a long way to go until May. And for parents, we talk a lot about financial aid and how that's going to be a major factor for many of you when making these decisions with your child. You won't have that stuff in hand until probably January or February. So, with that being said, you're probably not going to be making any decisions on college within the next few months. Some people will, and that's fine. But for the most part, I think people would love to see the financial statement to see what it's going to cost before making that deposit and committing to that school. And lastly, it's always a good idea for students to express gratitude to all the people helping them out in the process. And I'm not just talking about me, like it's my job to help them, but more so wanting them to express gratitude to you as a parent who's helping them, but also their teachers. Teachers play a huge role in college admissions as well. Your student will probably be asking for a letter recommendation from a teacher. So anytime a student can express gratitude, that's a good thing, not just in college admissions, but once again, life in general. So you as a parent, what is your role in this process? Well, going back to what we talked about with the students, allowing your child to take the lead, which, as I mentioned, easier said than done, right? We need to kind of keep a watchful eye over the shoulder to make sure they don't make any major mistakes. But at the same time, we have to let students navigate this process independently at certain times. We want to be supportive and keep an open mind. Maybe your student is applying to some schools that you hadn't initially thought of, maybe you don't know much about. Maybe they're looking at certain college majors that you might question, you know, um, if it's going to be something that's going to be something that's going to help them be stable and financially independent in the future. But we have to kind of keep an open mind at this point. And of course, as a parent, we also need to be patient, um, and just ask for help when you need it. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to me or anyone else in the office if you have a question. Um, Also, reaching out to the admissions offices can be helpful as well. But please, don't feel like you're bothering me or anyone else if you need some questions answered, because I'm guessing even if you had a child go through this a couple years ago or somewhat recent, things have probably changed just a little bit. And as I mentioned, every school is a little bit different. So asking questions, that's definitely a good thing. I also like to say, there's a few things that parents should not be doing. Number one, completing applications. I've seen that firsthand. Completing essays. I used to read thousands of essays, and I've definitely seen some where I knew this was not a 17-year-old student, and this definitely was done by a parent. Do not impersonate your child through communications or any other means. Stalking admissions officers, I never experienced that firsthand, but I've heard some stories. Um, so don't go over the edge and go too far with communicating with those people. It could actually hurt your students' odds in some ways. And also, this last point about talking about college incessantly, that's partially my fault. It's part of my job really is to talk about college a lot. So they're getting that here on the school side of life. And then if they come home and at every evening around the dinner table, it's being discussed over and over, it can really, have students kind of get burnt out on the whole process and takes away, the fun part of it. So we don't want students to get discouraged or just get kind of burnt out on the whole process in general. So the senior year checklist. So parents that came to the sessions last week were given a checklist, just kind of a general frame of reference for, okay, we're in this point of the senior year. Here are some things that your student should be doing. And I can probably get that attached to whenever this email goes out with this link so that you have it. But your student definitely has it. When I went around to all the senior classrooms, they were given a folder with a few items, and this was one of those that was included. But today we're going to kind of focus on the August and September boxes from the checklist. And that would be these things right here. So if I had to really sum up, what are the priorities right now? What are the things that parents, but really students, should be focused on as we head into September here shortly? Number one, campus visits. And it was pretty obvious to me as I did classroom visits that typically only about half of the students had done an official campus visit, which I was hoping that would be a much higher rate. But I understand last year students did not have a dedicated counselor. And so um, the counseling office here was understaffed, and that was a difficult position for everyone to be in. So I understand why maybe it wasn't something that was stressed on a ton, but I definitely encourage students and families to make that a priority. Also, retesting and submitting SAT and ACT scores if needed. Beginning applications and essays, that should be a focus right now. Once applications are submitted, the next logical step would be to request an official transcript. Colleges cannot make decisions on applications until they have that. Students also need to be asking for letters of recommendation at this point. Some schools require them, some don't. So once again, as needed. Begin scholarship search. So we do have some scholarships that are currently open right now with upcoming deadlines. So that will be a priority really throughout the entire senior year. You know, month by month, getting into winter and even early spring, we'll be seeing scholarships become available. Most students actually are not going to be able to see the results of those scholarship applications until May in some cases. But we definitely want to be focused on scholarships pretty much at all times throughout senior year. And lastly, and I cannot stress this enough, I'll talk about it multiple times during this video, but building a relationship with the college admissions counselor can be really important. So admissions counselors, who are they? Well, every college or university has admissions officers. Some are called counselors, some are called recruiters. It kind of depends on the college, but they have dedicated people in the admissions office that are geographically assigned to students in that area. So every college and university out there has people dedicated to working with Providence students. So these people can answer basic questions about the college, but in many cases, they're actually the same folks that are actually reading applications and making those decisions, and also, advocating for students to get scholarships. So they play a big part in the process overall. And I cannot stress enough how important it is for your student to get to know these people and to maintain that relationship all throughout senior year. So let's start off with campus visits. I said that was kind of the first priority. Campus visits, if you've never done one before, the most basic part of it is that, there's different options you have. The most, I guess, convenient way is you can actually do virtual campus visits from the comfort of your own home. And some schools were doing this before COVID, but pretty much every, every school now does offer a virtual option. Sometimes you're just kind of, it's almost like a Google Street View, and you're going through campus and clicking on buildings, it gives you information, or sometimes they're live virtual meetings that you can do. The most common one, though, is typically the in-person, which that could be a large group setting of a couple hundred students and their families, or it could be very typical where we just have your family maybe getting a tour from a current student and then sitting down for an info session or sitting down with an admissions counselor and having that meeting. But there's more to do on campus visits than just getting a tour of the campus itself. Students can typically ask or request to sit in on a class, which I think is really important. Just kind of seeing what the difference is between the classes they're taking here, the style or even the size of the classes. Chances are it's going to be a little bit different than what they've experienced here at Providence. So that's a really great experience and gives them some indication as to whether that would be a good learning environment, because some places it might be a lecture hall of 500 people. Other schools, it might be 4, 5, 6 students kind of in a circle with their professor. So it could look very different based on the school itself. Also, most colleges will let you meet with a professor, an advisor, someone kind of on the academic side of things, which I think can be really important. Getting to know the people that will be teaching you, I think that's really insightful. Also, eating lunch, not just because, it's a free meal, but, students, they're going to have to be eating the food on that campus for the next 4 years. So I would think, at least for me, person who really likes food, I would want to check that out and see what it has to offer. And overnight stays, that's kind of something that I typically have students kind of reserve for second semester when they get down to their final 2 or 3 schools. Usually the overnight stay can kind of be the final factor that plays into their decision. There's just so many things they can see on an overnight visit that maybe they can't see from a typical 1 or 2 hour tour or whatever it might be on campus. So seeing what the campus has to offer and what the students are doing after classes are finished, that can also be important for a student. Typically, you can't just show up on a campus and ask for a tour. They may give you a piece of paper and you can do a self-guided tour. But if you want to have a tour guide and really get things set up with a sit down with at least some professional in the admissions office, typically you need to go to the college's admissions page and sign up there to reserve your spot. It's important to remind everyone that our seniors do have 2 excused absences from Providence throughout the year. And many times you can knock out 2 visits in one day. I would further advocate that if you don't have any plans currently for fall break, that would be an excellent time to do visits. You have a full week. And typically the colleges out there are still in session. So our fall break doesn't match up with theirs, which is great because you can see students and you can see life on campus versus seeing it as kind of a ghost town if there's no classes in session. So I would definitely recommend, if you don't have any plans for fall break, maybe look at reserving some time for campus visits. And overall, campus visits are super important because I think about juniors. I really want them to focus on campus visits this year because you don't truly know if you want to go to a college until you do that visit. We have lots of students that grow up thinking they want to go to a certain school, or that mom and dad went to a school, or I like this school's football or basketball program. Those are important things, but at the same time, if they haven't gone to campus and seen it for themselves, it's going to be hard for them to determine whether or not they want to spend the time and the money on the application. I mentioned some students will be retesting and submitting test scores for their college applications. I will say that almost 80% of colleges right now are test optional, meaning a student could apply to a college without using or submitting an SAT or ACT score, and they can still get in and get a decent scholarship in many cases. COVID has kind of changed things and made it more popular for schools to be test optional. But, at the end of the day, I think there's a path for every student. For students who struggle with testing, they have a lot of anxiety. If they feel like their test scores are not an accurate reflection of their academic potential, if it doesn't match up with their, transcript, and, if that looks completely different than the test score they're getting, I think going test optional is a great way to go. I support it. Students are more than just a test score, and colleges know that. Colleges, the number one factor they look at is the transcript. That's the best indicator because at that point, when they're applying as a senior, they have 6 semesters worth of academic data to go off of to make a decision, whereas an SAT or ACT is just 4 hours on a Saturday morning, right? I think we'd all agree you have a lot more data in the 6 semesters worth of history versus one test. But with that being said, if a student does have a strong test score and they feel like it is a good indicator of their potential as a student, then yeah, there's a great path for you to submit your test scores as well. And for so many students that are not submitting test scores, it could make your student look even better if they are submitting those scores. So I think it's great that, any type of student has an option there. So for the next test coming up, the deadline's coming up September 2nd. So that's this Friday, September 2nd is the deadline to register, but October 1st, if you want to mark that on your calendar, that would be the next logical exam that a student could take. If they want to jump in and take the ACT, which isn't as popular around here, they can go ahead and register for the October 22nd ACT date. Some students do better on one versus the other. I always encourage students to try both. All the current seniors took the SAT last year here at Providence in March. If that was the only test that a student took, I definitely recommend them to take the SAT a second time. Like I said, even if you're not a great test taker, at least take it a second time. You're almost guaranteed to do better. Okay. Some students tend to do better on the ACT. The SAT is set up kind of in two major sections. You have kind of your reading, writing section, verbal section, and then you have your math section. The ACT kind of breaks it up a little bit into the reading and language, math, and it has a science section as well. So students that are really interested in a science field, or maybe they want to study something in college in that field, and they're just very strong in that subject area, maybe they should take a look at the ACT as well. For most colleges, the December test is the final one they will consider, meaning that this December 10th ACT and that December 3rd SAT is really the last test they will consider for scholarships and obviously for admission on the front end. But some schools like U of L, Louisville, I think will still allow you to test all the way through the spring of your senior year. So if you're looking for a certain score to get the next scholarship level, you can continue testing throughout the spring if you feel like you need to. But like I said, there's a path forward for students when it comes to testing. And I think that's a good thing. So if you have any questions about should I submit, should I not submit, let me know. One easy thing you can always do is just go to Google, type in the college's name. So let's say it's IU, type in Indiana University, and then type in admitted student profile. That will then give you an indication of what are the average GPAs and test scores for students getting admitted. A lot of colleges will publish that data, and so that can kind of help guide you in determining whether or not you should be submitting your score or if you should be going test optional. I'm also happy to help with those questions. And once again, if you have that built-in relationship with that admissions counselor at that college, you can always ask them as well. Say, hey, I'm getting ready to apply. I'm not sure if I want to submit my test scores or not. Could you give me some idea if what route would be best for me? And usually they're happy to share that information. So the actual application itself, what is it really, how do students go about it? Because sometimes I kind of gloss over it. And so I would like to really reiterate, there's two main ways to apply to a college. Number one, going to the college's website. So each college typically has an application that you can find on their admissions page. That's the first way to do it. Or a lot of students nowadays use this thing called the Common Application. So the Common App is a website where students can go and complete a general application. And then there's roundabout of 1,000 colleges and universities that will accept an application through that portal. So instead of putting in your address and your extracurricular activities and all that basic information over and over and over, you can just do it once and then apply to a number of schools at the same time. So it can definitely be a time saver. Some colleges take one or the other. Some colleges will accept both. Their website application and the Common App. People ask me all the time, do colleges have a preference? Honestly, no, they really don't. So if your student is questioning, which way they should go, honestly, if a student is applying to 5 schools and majority of those are on the Common App, go ahead and do the Common App. But if you're applying to 5 schools and only one of them is on the Common App, then you should probably just go to the individual colleges and websites for those schools and do their application there. But colleges, they have no preference. So don't sit there and think about, well, they take it both ways. They'll have it on their website and they also take it through the Common App. Which way should I do it? Which way looks like I'm expressing more interest? Honestly, don't spend time stressing about that. Just go with what makes sense. So as I mentioned before, when a student applies, the next step would be to request an official transcript. So we use a website called Parchment. And I mentioned when I was in the classrooms with the students, I gave them a folder, and within that folder, they had a page that gave them a unique access code just for them to create an account on Parchment. And so whenever they need a transcript sent, they will go into Parchment, they'll log in there, and they will request the different schools they want to receive it. And then Mrs. Delaney in our guidance office will then send off those official transcripts to those colleges. So a student cannot simply just email me and say, hey, Mr. Gaybar, can you send my transcript to Louisville? Because I will just tell them you need to do it through Parchment. That's the only way in which we can send it for you. Another important point, we talked about test scores. If a student is going test optional, meaning they do not want to send their test scores to the college, they need to let us know, because as a matter of kind of tradition and just school policy, we typically have test scores included on the transcripts. And obviously, we don't want to include those if a student is going test optional. Technically, a college, even if they apply test optional and they do find test scores on a transcript, they're not supposed to take that into consideration. But we know everyone's human. There may be something on a subconscious level where that does play into their decision. So students, and I've told them this multiple times, and maybe you can remind them, if they do want to go test optional, please let us know and we will remove it from the transcript. On some applications, they may or may not require an essay. So that's another important thing for students to take into account. And then we might find, as you're helping your student go through the applications, it's going to let them decide which application or which admissions plan they want to choose, which can be confusing. All these terms kind of, blend in together, and it's hard to really differentiate. The most basic type of admissions plan is that regular decision deadline. So those would be typically in January or February. So some students may be choosing regular decision. Some schools, that's the only option they have. If a student has the option to do something like early action, which you can see there, usually those deadlines are October through December, that's always a good option. It's always great to apply early, because then you're going to hear back early as well. Rolling admissions is something where the schools pretty much, they're allowing applications to roll in at any time and making decisions as those come in. One thing to really keep in mind and look out for is this thing called early decision. So early decision is similar to early action in that students are applying early and they will get decisions early. But the major difference is it's legally binding. So this graphic may help kind of give you those details. So on the left-hand side, we have non-restrictive application plans. All these are good, safe ones to go with. Like I said, I would encourage early action all day long. But I mentioned early decision, it's legally binding. So what does that mean exactly? Well, when a student applies to that college, they're basically saying, you are my number one choice. I'm not applying to any other school in this way. And I'm committing to you in that if you accept me as a student, I am then legally bound to attend your institution. So I'll say that again. If a student applies to early decision and they are admitted, the expectation legally is that they attend that school and they withdraw all their other applications elsewhere. So that sounds really scary and odd, right? Well, there's a few reasons why students might be going early decision. Number one, the student probably knows that that's their number one school. Number two, financial aid is not all that important, meaning that the family feels comfortable paying out of pocket for most, if not all, of the costs. Because if you think about it, these early decisions are coming out late in the fall, well before they see a financial aid package. So you're basically committing to a school without understanding the financial impact it's going to have on you. But some families are able to write one check and cover the cost, and that's not an issue. I guess another reason why students go early decision, some studies have shown, even though it's kind of mixed results here, that some of the more selective schools, so selective meaning they accept less than 40% of applicants, they found that some students who go early decision have a higher acceptance rate. So that would be another motivating factor for family to go early decision. I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't really advocate for it. I want students to have as many options as possible, and really, putting a student in a corner with this, making this legally binding agreement seems kind of weird to me. If a student did go early decision, what typically happens is the student has to sign a document, you as a parent signs a document, and I, as a school official, has to sign a document to make sure everyone's on the same page. And I say legally binding, but I don't think anyone's ever been taken to court on backing out of an agreement in the spring, but it's just not a good look. It hurts the reputation of you and your student, but also it reflects poorly on Providence if we're not keeping our promises. Like I said, if we're signing that document saying we understand that if the student is admitted, they will attend that school. So if we start backing out of our promises like that, that's not a good look. Another restrictive application plan would be the restrictive early action. So it's similar to early action over here, but it restricts you in that you can only apply to one school as early action. So one school that may fit in this category would be Notre Dame. I think they still have the restrictive early action plan. If you're wondering what schools have early decision, honestly, it's a lot of East Coast schools, especially up in the Northeast, those highly selective institutions, your Ivy Leagues. But here in Indiana, we have a number of schools. Hanover College has early decision, DePaul University, and then Wabash College, the all men's school, and then St. Mary's College, the all women's school, up next to Notre Dame. So last time I checked, those were the four colleges in Indiana that have early decision. You might find some up in Chicago, like University of Chicago or Northwestern, schools like that. So just be aware. Typically, a student's not able to submit an early decision application unless that paperwork is signed by everyone. So I don't want you to freak out and think that your student is out there applying early decision without your knowledge. Typically, that's not able to take place. If you have any questions about this, please reach out. Letters recommendation. So they may or may not be required. Some colleges want multiples. Maybe they want a teacher and a counselor. Some want either or. They don't really have a preference. Some schools don't want any at all. They do not even consider them as part of the admissions process. So once again, every college is different. So it's kind of up to your student to do their homework. So who should be writing the letters recommendation? Sometimes, like I said, they want a counselor, and so obviously that's me. But what about a teacher? If they want a teacher recommendation, what type of teacher would be the best person to complete this task? Well, that should be probably a teacher they currently have, or maybe one they've had in the past, more recent past, I guess I would say. Going back to a freshman teacher, that could be, a little bit too far distant in the past. So maybe a current teacher or a junior or sophomore, could write this, but it should come from a teacher from a core subject area. So that means it should be someone from science, English, math, or social studies. In some cases, it is appropriate for, like, if a student is looking to study something in the fine arts area, then having an art teacher or a theater teacher, that would be appropriate in those cases. But typically, they're going to want a recent teacher from a core subject. Students may need to share a brag sheet with their teachers so they, have some additional information to go off of. Typically, when a student is working on an application online, there'll be a section where they can choose the recommenders, and they will type in the name of the person, what they teach, and then put in their email address. And then that teacher would then receive an automated email from that college or from something like the Common App that tells them they are being requested to submit an application on that student's behalf. What's critically important here is that the student asks the teacher before they send that request. Teachers hate nothing more than to get an email out of the blue from a college saying that you've been requested to write a letter on so-and-so's behalf. Students should really ask the teacher in person, or at the very least through email, to make sure they are okay and they've confirmed that they are willing to write that letter. And then, of course, after the letter is written, it's always a good idea, going back to what we talked about with expressing gratitude, to then send that teacher a thank you note or an email, something like that. I don't think gift cards or things like that are necessary, but if that's what you want to do to show your appreciation for that teacher, feel free to help your student with that. So scholarships and financial aid. I mentioned during the in-person sessions that I cannot cover every single topic in college admissions in the short time that we had. But that's why I mentioned we have that dedicated evening event on September 15th to talk about financial aid. But I do want to briefly touch on the basics of financial aid. And so if we're looking at, how do students pay for college? What are some sources of financial aid? We would say there's three places where students can get that. Number one, the institution they are applying to. So that's the biggest source of financial aid. And so we want to exhaust all the resources possible. Usually when a student applies to a college, that general application for admission will then have them considered for scholarships. But there's some colleges out there that have a totally separate application just for the scholarship side of that school. So make sure your student does their homework on that and they're meeting all those deadlines. But the institution the student is applying to by far is the place where we want to spend a lot of time investigating and trying to make sure we squeeze out every possible dollar. The second source of money is going to come from the government, the federal government and state government. And typically, where that comes from is the free application for federal student aid, which is we call the FAFSA, which opens on October 1st. So, like I said, having that September 15th financial aid evening event should be good because it's just 2 weeks prior to that opening. So, October 1st, when that rolls around, you guys are ready to hit the ground running. The FAFSA is optional, it's not something students have to do. I'll talk in a minute about the importance of it. But FAFSA is something that you will have to do each and every year if you choose to, because obviously a family's financial situation changes year to year, and they're going to want updated tax returns every single year. Okay, the third place where scholarships are going to be coming from are we would call outside scholarships. So there's a number of websites and sources out there for that. The Community Foundation of Southern Indiana, the CFSI, that is currently open for students, and that's really where I'm directing students right now. There'll be numerous other local scholarships that will be coming out throughout the upcoming months, and I really want students to focus on those because there's lots of websites like FastWeb, College Board, Going Merry, CapEx. There's actually a website called scholarships.com, which is truly legitimate. But if you think about it, those big websites, you're applying against thousands or tens of thousands of other students across the country. So typically the local scholarships, your chances and odds are going to be much higher. So we really want students, if they're looking for outside scholarships, to focus first on the local ones. It's also important to note that there is a difference between a sticker price and a net price of a college. Most of us right now, if we go online and look at the sticker price, meaning the tuition, and then the room and board and any other fees, if we look at the total number there, it's going to make us sick to our stomach. But it's important to note that, excuse me, it's important to note that hardly any students are actually paying that full sticker price. I always tell people it's like, buying a new car. Typically, you're not going to, spend the money and pay that sticker price. You're going to try to negotiate and chew it down a little bit. So net price is really when you take the total overall cost of the college and you start to subtract all those different sources of aid we just talked about, the institutional aid, the government aid, outside scholarships. That will give you a bottom line figure of what it will cost to attend that school next year. As I mentioned, that comes in the form of a financial aid package. So students, are applying right now to colleges. They may be getting severance letters back, and it may have a merit scholarship award level, which is great. The next logical step would be doing the FAFSA October 1st. And that usually takes a couple months for colleges to receive that information. And then they, bind everything up in a nice single package, and they will show you what overall cost would be for your student to attend that school next year. And that comes, like I said, typically in early spring, January, February, March. Now, I will say, even though it is optional, I do recommend families do the FAFSA. And if you're someone out there saying, we did it for my other son or daughter, we didn't get any free money, I totally understand your pain. The FAFSA is like the worst possible part of this whole process, especially if you're like a small business owner. Usually, the FAFSA isn't all that helpful in some ways and doesn't always reflect the true need of a family financially. So I understand the frustration with it. But what I will say is, even if you don't qualify for like a Pell Grant or any other types of grants, which are free money you don't have to pay back, even if you don't qualify for those things through the FAFSA, you may qualify for need-based aid at the institution itself that you're applying to. So you do the FAFSA, you can put up to 10 schools to receive that report, and you may find that you're not getting money from Uncle Sam, but maybe you're getting money from that college or university outside of the merit scholarship, right? The merit scholarship is based on academic merit. So the GPA, the transcript overall, test scores, if they're submitting them, whereas FAFSA is more about the need-based aid. So you might find yourself getting some money from the college, but maybe, you just might get a loan option. Everyone who does a FAFSA, regardless of your income level and financial situation, you're going to be eligible typically for $5,500 in a Stafford loan. So that's the one important part of doing the FAFSA, because you might get some money from the school. An additional area we would look at is we get into the spring. So spring of senior year is a great time once you start getting your financial aid packages and you start doing cost comparisons. It can come in critically important during this time. Um, and I put on there, hold the deposit, because I really want you guys to, wait and see what the financial impact, when that FAFSA gets factored in, when you get the financial aid package, I want you to wait to make the deposit until you feel comfortable with the money. Because what colleges do, and colleges don't, broadcast this out there, they don't put it on their website. They're probably not going to tell you about it. But a lot of colleges, especially private colleges, they do what's called a financial aid appeal process. So in the spring, like I said, you have all your offers in front of you. If you have, similar schools, but one of those schools is much more competitive in their offer, meaning their net price is much more competitive, you can then use that to request additional money and aid from the school that your student wants to go to. So here's what I actually do sometimes. It's probably not the most ethical thing, but I do tell students, if you're looking to apply to, let's say, a private school, like Bellarmine, we'll have a lot of students applying to Bellarmine this year. That is a private school. And so let's think about other schools that might be similar to them. So we might say something like DePaul or Hanover or Franklin College, Earlham, different schools like that that kind of fit in the same category. Go ahead and have your student apply to those colleges, especially if it's, if it's free to apply, like why not? Go ahead and, if they're on the Common App, you already have that done. You might as well add that school to your Common App and send them your application. Because if you apply to them and you include them on your FAFSA, they will send you a financial aid package. And let's say one of those schools I mentioned, like let's say Hanover, is actually more financially competitive. You can then go to Bellarmine and say, hey, Bellarmine, thank you for the offer of admission. I appreciate the scholarship you've given me. You're my number one school, but I have these other offers that are more competitive. Could you reconsider my aid? And they can always say no up front. That's always a reality. And I'm not saying that schools are like Walmart and have a price match guarantee, but let's say they do take that in consideration. They may have, have you do some additional paperwork, and they typically do need to see your other offers. So you can't just bluff and play poker with them. You actually have to produce copies of your other offers. But yeah, it could give you a little bit of extra money. So like anything in life, there's some negotiation to financial aid. So I tell parents, you need to do the FAFSA, because a school will not reconsider your aid package unless you have a FAFSA on file. If you don't do the FAFSA and you go to them in the spring and ask for more money, they're probably just going to tell you no up front. Okay. And I mentioned you want to hold the deposit because, number one, it's like, anything else in life, you want to get some quotes. You want to see what a general fee amount would be to go to a school. So just like buying insurance, you're going to get a couple different quotes. Why not do that here with college? Apply to a couple private schools, for example, and see what the overall cost is going to look like, to really know if you're getting a decent deal, if it's kind of in that typical range. But as I mentioned, if you deposit early on and you come back and ask for more money, I'm not saying that college won't consider it, but if you think about it, colleges are a business. And if they have two students and one of which has already deposited, which is basically typically $200 to $500, might be refundable, might not be, but you put down that deposit, that's you making a major commitment saying, I intend to enroll at your institution next year. The minute you put down that deposit, you lose a considerable amount of leverage. Okay. So please don't get too trigger happy with the deposit. I'm guessing your child, when they get accepted, there's going to be some literature included that is really recommending and encouraging them to submit a deposit to make the whole thing official and to hold their place in the next class. Just wait. You want to wait for a number of reasons. Obviously at that point you won't know what the financial cost is going to be. But additionally, if you put down that deposit, you may lose some of that leverage you have in the spring. As I mentioned, May 1st is the national decision deadline, and some colleges pretty much work up until May 1st to make their classes. So the spring is a great time to really do some cost comparisons and to also request appeals. I am happy to help a student if they don't know where to begin. When we get to that point, I can help them craft a letter, give them the structure of what the letter needs to entail and kind of guide you guys through that process. Because as I mentioned, this isn't something that's put out there in marketing materials by the colleges, because obviously they want to get as many students for the lowest price possible. So my job is to be the advocate for you and your family and to help you kind of navigate that process when we get there. And lastly, once again, I've said this multiple times today, I cannot stress it enough. Encourage your child to get to know their admissions counselor. Start building those relationships. They can be helpful not just because they can answer lots of questions and they're kind of the gatekeepers and kind of the go-to person for anything that has to do with that college, but these are the people that are shepherding you through the process. There's many times students come to my office and they ask me about, I don't know how to do this at this college. Sometimes I can help. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. I don't work there. I haven't worked there before, so I don't know the answer to that. So there's, we have a person we can reach out to and contact to help us navigate that. That can be helpful. Now, as I mentioned, these people do play a critical role in deciding who gets in and who doesn't. And also, when it comes to financial aid, this will be the person you're going to ask for additional money in the spring, if that's your situation. And they're going to be the people kind of going to bat for you with financial aid at their school. So if you have that relationship, it's going to make all these situations much easier. And that person is going to fight much harder for you. As an admissions counselor, typically every one of those people, they have kind of an enrollment goal of how many students they need to matriculate from their geographic area. And while they aren't paid on a commission basis, those are kind of really critical goals that they have of how many students they need to recruit. And so there's built-in motivation for them to be helpful for your student. So we need to use these people because sometimes they go underutilized and maybe students don't ever even reach out to that person. But they can be a really important asset in the college search process. Okay, so if you have questions, my contact information is there. Obviously, in this setting, we're not live, so I can't take live questions. But if there's anything you guys feel like you need, please let me know. Email, phone. If you want to set up a personal meeting with me, I'm happy to do that as well. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. But I do thank you for listening to this video. Like I said, look forward to working with you and your student this year. So don't hesitate if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.